there's, as Churchill said, there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. Well, you can't believe the US government statistics, but normally you can drill down on them and tend to get some glimmer of the truth. Chinese statistics are completely manufactured, made out of whole cloth. So you can't believe anything that the Chinese put out.
The Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. This is Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Kerry Lutz, and it's time for another Triple Lutz report. Haven't done one in months. Maybe it's been a year. The last one was about the Second Amendment case in the Supreme Court where New York State against Braun or Brewer, can't remember the name. In any event, we're talking about China. I've been a China follower for 2 decades now. I've visited the country twice. I don't pretend to be an authority on it, but I do follow other people who are authorities. And Gordon Chang has been saying it was going to blow up. It was fake for better part of a decade. So we give Gordon Chang the Stop Clock Award. It's easy to say, well, you look at an 80-year-old person and it's easy to say, well, you're probably going to die within the next decade. And the odds are you're going to be right. But hey, the reasons that Gordon stated, huge borrowing, huge debt bubbles, malinvestment, housing, export-driven, exploitative, mercantilistic model, all these reasons and more, China is in the process of imploding now. Now, we'll talk about the reasons for the implosion. Like I said, printing money, hyperinflation. They have been acquiring gold and other resources, but they don't seem to have any inclination to want to back their currency by it. You heard a lot about the BRICS nations, and now they've added Saudi Arabia and Argentina, who wants them, and a couple of other countries. Charles Nenner seems to think that the BRICS are going to be something. I don't, because their largest economy is China. Second, I guess the second largest is India, and then Russia. And these BRICS countries have performed over the past decade since the great financial collapse horribly, especially China. China has had no real growth during that time. So let's take a closer look, because China is supposedly the world's second largest economy, could be the first. It all depends how you judge it. Had a monstrous boom for 40 years. They opened up in 1978. In 2000, I think it was 2000, they were allowed into the World Trade Organization. Hey, phenomenal string of economic growth. Although, there's, as Churchill said, there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. Well, you can't believe the US government statistics, but normally you can drill down on them and tend to get some glimmer of the truth. Chinese statistics are completely manufactured, made out of whole cloth. So you can't believe anything that the Chinese put out. Nothing. So yes, they've had an impressive string of success, economic success. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, abject poverty. And when you think of poverty, you can't even imagine what it's like in these third world countries, China included, because China was once a third world country. Now it was on its way to becoming a first world country. We'll see what happens. So what happened? Basically, the current regime there by Xi pretty much meddled in everything. They didn't understand the reason for China's success over the past 3.5 decades. They thought it was just China is great. And no, that might be the case. China might be emerging great power, but it wasn't because China was great. It was because they unleashed the power of individuals, of entrepreneurs. Everyone in China was in business making money. And once they started to interfere in the economy and really stop the process that unleashed this tidal wave of wealth creation, it was basically a foregone conclusion that this thing was going to bomb out. When you look back, when they first started their economic success, they just come off of the counter revolution, the Great Leap Forward, and most of China's economy was done through state-owned enterprises, incredibly inefficient, corrupt. Well, corruption is the rule of law in China. Okay, everybody is getting something. Everybody's on the take. In a lot of ways, it's not that much different from the United States. However, in the United States, the entrepreneur, the driving force behind a project, knows he's going to have to pay out somewhere between 5 to 15% to, let us charitably say, grease the wheels. In China, you might be paying the CCP, Chinese Communist Party officials and local honchos 50%. So then you have to cut back on every single aspect of the project in order to attempt to earn a profit. And that includes screwing subcontractors and cheating on the specs of the job. But that's another thing that we're going to get into. The point is that once the Chinese Communist Party again became the dominant party in the country's economy, that's when things really started to head downhill. And now we fast forward to today. Floods, natural disasters. I mean, China makes Florida and California look like totally safe and secure places the way things work there. They've just had these enormous floods. Beijing was getting flooded along with a ghost city that's Xi's personal project. So what do? They don't try to preserve people, save people. No, they go and they blow up dikes and they flood the water. They let the water create a path for it into lesser provinces and don't give any warning. And people are getting killed, their properties destroyed. It's just an unbelievable situation. Haven't seen that happen in the United States yet. Maybe it will at some point. You could argue what happened in Maui was part of some nefarious plot. I haven't seen evidence to that effect, but it certainly is worthy of exploration. But in China, there's no exploration necessary. It's like, to save Beijing, we destroy the outlying provinces, and the people are enraged. And then when there's a disaster in China, it's not like the United States where it's on the news 24/7 until the next disaster comes. No, you see a couple of references to it, and then the CCP totally censors it. So what we're seeing is the infrastructure. Everybody's raving about the Chinese infrastructure. It's state-of-the-art. It's amazing. It's incredible. And they're building tunnels, bridges, and all that, except that under the corrupt model of the CCP, half the money gets blown on graft. In the United States, maybe it's 15 to 25%, but the project gets done. When there's a bridge collapse in the United States on a major highway or a minor highway, it's all over the media. Everybody is outraged. We got to do something about it. America's infrastructure is crumbling, blah, blah, blah. Infrastructure has issues for certain, but the infrastructure in the United States is far outliving its expected life. In China, not the case. They have regular bridge collapses, and then when there's a flood, everything comes down. In Beijing, after the flooding, sinkholes are opening up all over the city, all over the place. And sinkholes are a common phenomena because they overpump, overexploit the groundwater, causing subsidence of the soil, which causes building collapses. So you just have to go onto YouTube. And a lot of this had been censored and really kind of throttled for years. But now, all of a sudden, I guess Google leaving China, they don't have such an interest in the Chinese model enduring. And now they're all over YouTube and all over Google as well. And you need to go take a look at a few of them just to see. One show that I really love is China Fact Chasers. These two guys have ridden around the country in motorcycles, exploring ghost cities, poverty, all this. Finally, they had to flee China because their lives and their families were in danger. But it's really a great show. It's part of a larger show. I think it's called the China Show that they also do. Highly recommended. But the point is, their infrastructure, brand new infrastructure, they show pictures, they go into a building, and every stairwell in a high rise in the United States has to have a fire hose, or at least one per floor, depending on the size of the structure. In China, they had a similar rule, except when they did the inspection of these fire hoses and they turned the thing to see the water pressure, turned the valve on, nothing happened. And then they would pull it off. They just broke it off. Literally, it was connected to nothing. Storm grates that are supposed to take away storm water, they pull open the grate and the grate's just there. There's nothing else there. It's what this China Chasers guy calls China is the land of shortcuts and facades. So they go through safety theater, but there is no real safety there. And you see these floods. One tunnel got flooded in a province a couple of years ago. Thousands of people died. You never read about it. The CCP never admitted it. When there's a disaster, the CCP, rather than going to the aid of their citizens, basically stifles them, shuts them down, and makes sure that no bad news can get out there. But the people know. The people know. The CCP looks like it's on its deathbed. In China, every dynasty has ended with a great flood. Will it be the collapse of the Three Gorges Dam? Could very well be. Since I did my report on it, there was actually a YouTube that came out that actually detailed the shoddy construction and the way they cheated. Shoddy construction in China is called tofu dreg construction. So the walls are made of tofu, and it's got to do with when you make tofu and you cook it, you have these dregs that are useless. They don't have any flavor. Anyway, tofu dreg, that's all you need to know. China is the tofu dreg country. Their infrastructure shot. China does best when a Western company like Apple or whomever goes there, sets up a factory, sets standards, and gets product, and then they inspect the product and they throw out whatever didn't comply. Or when Tesla opens up a factory in China, that's when China right now has done best. And that's not to belittle the Chinese people, but the Western countries cannot tolerate the level of fraud and corruption that the Chinese and the Asians do. That's just a fact. Then we look at their real estate market. Nobody's buying property. Foreclosures in China are a whole different animal than here. It's like they foreclose on your house, and then you still got to pay the debt off. So, you're still on the hook. It's called recourse. In the U.S., certain states are recourse, certain states are non-recourse. But after the GCF, after the foreclosure crisis, basically, even the states where there's recourse, they don't chase the debtor for it. In China, they'll lock you up. They have debtors' prisons in China. So China, their housing market is collapsing before your very eyes. We had Evergrande and Country Garden now, which was twice the size of Evergrande, and the top 10 real estate companies in China have collapsed or will collapse probably within the next month. Then we've also got, the perils of Pauline here. It just keeps getting worse and worse. The banks are on the balls of their you-know-what. The banks have limited daily withdrawals. The banks, a lot of them have collapsed, and there is no FDIC, there's no Federal Reserve printing money out for the poor, woe-begotten depositors. No, they're just on their own, and they're starting to protest about it. So banking industry is on its way out. It's bad here in the United States. In the U.S., look, we've got a banking crisis that started and it's continuing to unfold, and hundreds of banks potentially will cease to exist if the Federal Reserve doesn't end its policy here of ever increasing interest rates. This remains to be seen. I don't know how much longer they're going to go. Nick Santiago on my show has been detailing this. He was spot on. He called for higher interest rates. He was about 6 months early, but he knew it was going to happen. Higher interest rates. Well, in China, they're cutting interest rates. They've got deflation. And so you got infrastructure collapse, real estate market, which is anywhere from 25 to 30% of China's GDP. You've got banking collapses right and left that you don't hear about. And of course, the export boom is gone. Foreign investment is gone. Foreign investors are not putting money into China any longer for good reason. And their exports are down double digit month over month. You can expect that China is going to see mass unemployment. Right now, their youth unemployment, the state says it's 20+%. The reality adjusted figures, it's closer to 50%. Hey, you think we have useless degrees in the United States like puppetry, English literature, blah, blah, blah? Well, advanced degrees in China have turned out to be useless. People getting engineering masters, doctorates, what are they doing? They're doing Uber and DoorDash food delivery services. So you've got implosion of the educational industrial complex. People are still trying to go to school, good schools there, but they're seeing that the fruits of their labor don't exist. So you can expect that mass dropouts, mass closures of Chinese universities. Hey, a lot of times we like to issue in the West propaganda about the East, and it's not true. It's unfounded. Like Russia is losing the war. I don't think Russia's winning the war. I don't think they're losing it. But if you watch the Western propaganda, you expect that Zelensky will be, taking over the Kremlin next week, and he'll be putting a silver stake or a wood spike through Putin's heart. I don't think it's quite that dire, but clearly the intentions of the war by the Russians have failed because it's still going on nearly 2 years later. But that's just an example of Western propaganda. Propaganda, this is not propaganda-driven, what's happening in China. What's happening in China is clearly fact-based. We're seeing it all over. So Gordon Chang, you were spot on, but you were just about 15 years too early. So it's always better to be right than to be wrong at the right time. So if you just stuck with it, you would have been fine. You shouldn't have been making predictions as to the time frame, but we love you anyway, Gordon. So what's going to happen? Well, implosion of China is going to have effects felt all over the country. The question is the implosion going to implode because of political instability, chaos, rioting, civil war, or is it going to be economic collapse? That's going to happen no matter what. Is it going to be an economic collapse that just leads to a new regime and maybe things can continue on somewhat? But it's going to affect you because so many of the products you and I purchase are produced in China. All of your electronics, all of the stuff. This microphone, I can tell you, it's a cloud microphone, and it was produced in the United States, but I wouldn't doubt if it's got Chinese components, particularly medications. All of the generic medications, if they don't, half of them come from China, and the other half, a lot of the precursors to those drugs are produced in China. A lot of building materials. So we're going to have this decoupling and this deglobalization, not so much a result of intent, but as a result of economic collapse. And it's going to affect every single country in the world to a greater or lesser degree because China was the world's factory. And hey, don't get me wrong, China makes a lot of great products. I'm sitting around my office here looking at all the great products we have, but they make a lot of garbage too. and they have no respect for intellectual property. Right now, intellectual property is considered a property class by most of the world, and you're supposed to get royalties, and they just rip it off. These are facts. I don't make this stuff up. So point is, collapse is coming. It could be here tomorrow. It could be here in 6 months. The political situation, they cannot deal with it. They are in no position to keep printing money, and they don't seem to want to, because they don't really care about their citizens suffering. Not that we do here in the West, but at least our founding documents showed a care and a consideration for the country's citizens that current execution of these documents of our government clearly doesn't have. But at least we had the right intention. They never had it in China. So a lot of things, I suggest you buy at least 6 months to a year worth of medications. Even if you're not sick, buy up a bunch of antibiotics, because they could be very difficult to get. The other question is, will a global health scare coincide with China's collapse to keep the people, to keep the sheeple in their place? I just don't know. I mean, I know I hear more Massachusetts type style masking taking place, even though we've got meta studies after meta studies that show, or certainly question, the efficacy of the prophylactic capabilities of masking for upper respiratory infections. Don't know about that. That's the ambit of conspiracy theorists. But just share with you a new shirt that I got. I wish I had it here. I'd show you now. It says, "I identify as a conspiracy theorist. My pronouns are told you so." Anyway, I'm telling you now, it's just like the 30s, but I think the consequences are going to be far worse. There are many more people in the world now. De-farm, urbanization has taken people off the farms. We have, like in the United States, like 2 or 3% of our total population works on farms, and they're productive. I'm not going to talk about the quality of the so-called food that they produce, but hey, you go to McDonald's, you get your Big Mac with cheese and fries and your Coke. Not that that's food, but it passes for food in many places in the world. So these are just things you need to be aware of. I'm telling you, this is coming. It's not propaganda. Coincided with the war in Ukraine. Will China seek to divert attention by invading Taiwan? I don't think so. China's targets, it's a target-rich environment. They can't attack Taiwan by surprise. Taiwan will know it's coming. Taiwan's been digging in for decades now. I'm not convinced that it's going to happen. I think saber rattling, kind of blackmailing the world is really the way to go for them. And that's what they've been doing all along. But hey, what's going to happen? I can't tell you. I don't know. It all depends whether it's a peaceful transition in China or a violent transition. Tyrants are not known for voluntarily letting go of power. So that's it for today. It's been another Triple Lutz Report. Kerry Lutz signing off.